Hey guys, Sensei Jones here. Today's video is going to be a little bit more basic on account that I picked up a little bit of a head cold over the weekend, and it's taken me a lot to stay focused on one thing right now. Today we're going to cover my iron hand training curriculum, just the one that I use for my own personal training. I'm not teaching this to any students before any of our viewers have a heart attack. I use two tools primarily for my iron hand training. Number one is my homemade wall-mounted makiwara. Now, as you can see from this, it's a 2-inch thick board mounted to the wall with two different layers of foam padding. The bottom layer is a higher density to ensure that my fist doesn't go straight through the softer foam into the board, and it provides a little bit of recoil. Pushes my fist back as I'm throwing my punches. The second training tool is a very rudimentary, very basic wall-mounted makiwara. All that there is to this is a 1-inch thick board bolted to the wall, wrapped in 5/16 unmanila rope. The first makiwara that I showed you guys is used primarily to build up strength in my wrists and help ensure that I'm not breaking my knuckles whenever I'm throwing my strikes. And the second one's primarily used to build up calluses on my knuckles. The rough edges of the rope tend to scrape against the skin heals and thickens. Now, the primary reason that I do this is, number one, to make sure if I'm hitting a harder target, it's not going to do damage to me. I started using these types of training tools probably about 6 years ago, and I've caught myself at work just using concrete walls as a striking post. Not very hard, I'm not throwing full force punches, but I can do so without tearing up my hands. Today I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of what I do for my own personal iron hand training. And small disclaimer, don't try this at home unless you talk to your instructor or your doctor, and be careful. There's a lot of times that I tell my students don't do what Sensei does, and this is one of those times. Don't do as Sensei does unless you're fully confident, you're an adult, and you've been cleared by a doctor. So with no further ado, let's get to the video. So for anyone who doesn't practice karate or anybody who's just getting into it, we're going to explain a little bit about what a traditional makiwara is. Traditionally, a makiwara was a board anchored into the ground with no support at the top part. The top part was wrapped in some type of padding with a little bit of rice straw rope. Now, whenever a practitioner uses a traditional makiwara, it's not so much about building force, it's about building technique. So whenever you hit the makiwara properly, it moves behind your strike. Creates a little bit of a slapping noise. This method is not so much used to build only technique, but it also builds force behind your strikes. The reinforcement behind bolting this to the wall will actually emulate fighting probably the world's strongest iron body practitioner because it doesn't move. Not every opponent's going to move in a fight or when they're hit, so it's best to train for the worst case scenario in a self-defense situation, in my opinion. This makiwara took probably 45 minutes to make, and it was just a couple of components that I had laying around the house. Now you will notice 4 striking areas on the makiwara. The top one is meant to measure at about head level for myself. The middle one, just underneath the top, is meant to measure about solar plex level, which is the muscle that controls our breathing. The next one down is meant to measure just above the kneecap, which is a good place to strike when you're trying to take down an opponent by the knee. And the bottom one is meant to be measured just above the ankle, which is a good area to obstruct an opponent's stepping or to sweep their leg. Now, of course, whenever I'm striking the bottom 2 pads, I'm not using my fist. To drop down that low would just be completely not practical. However, I do practice my low snapping side kicks on those 2 target areas because it's a very good technique to really set in a strike to the opponent's lower body, that with roundhouses. But because of the shape of this makiwara, roundhouses are quite impossible to throw on this target. Alright, so I just finished throwing my first set of punches on the soft Makiwara. I'll typically throw about 400 on each hand throughout the entire day of training. So just now I finished 200 punches on each hand. I finished 100 on each hand with my back 3 knuckles, which I know is a big no-no, but we'll discuss that here in a minute. Then 100 on each hand throwing my first 2 knuckles, which is the preferred method. After we finish our workout, we'll discuss a little bit more of why I'm hitting with the wrong knuckles. We'll go a little bit more into the science of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Moving on to the hard Makiwara. The rope wrap Makiwara that I'm using in this portion of the video is actually very similar to what Anko Dosu and Mas Oyama used in their training, according to story. There was a story that at one point in time, Anko Dosu was trying to create a better Makiwara. So he took a straw zori sandal and put it up against a brick wall. He'd hit it a few times and the brick that was behind the sandal would eventually break. So he'd relocate the zori someplace else on the wall. Story has it that after a few hours of doing this method of training, he completely destroyed a brick wall. The reason I bring up that story, no one knows whether it's actually true or not, is because to train to be your best, you have to train a little bit out of the ordinary, in my own humble opinion. Just finished my last 400 punches on the Makiwara, on the hard Makiwara, and I don't know if we can see this on camera, but I didn't even feel that happen. A little bit of blood stain. Lost just a little bit of skin on my knuckle. Didn't feel it happen. Been doing this for a while now and can't hardly feel anything in my hands. Again, we'll cover that, why that's a good thing, here in just a few minutes. Wow, it's amazing how a few minutes can really feel like a few seconds, huh? Anyway, a little bit of an after shot of my hands. This is my right hand. Doesn't look too bad, a little bit red, a little bit worn. It's my left hand, the one that I drew the blood on. And this isn't a big deal, I've had worse. I've literally had blood gushing out of my knuckles after a workout. The reason that's good is that cut is going to turn into scar tissue. Scar tissue is a lot more difficult to tear than normal tissue. Just about every scar I've had, I've been hit in the same area and never re-broke. Now, also that's within reason. If someone takes a scalpel and cuts it, yeah, it's going to bleed again. But this skin that's going to turn into scar tissue is going to build up a lot stronger. It's not going to make for beautiful, lush hands. I'll never be a hand model, let's face it. But whenever I'm hitting something or hitting somebody, I don't have to worry about my knuckles cracking open nearly as much. Another beautiful thing about this training is, and it's going to sound terrible, which is why I say talk to your doctor first. This kills out the nerve endings in your hand for the most part. It's probably going to play havoc on me whenever I'm much older, but whenever I'm much older, I may not have the need, well, I may not have the need to hit stuff quite as hard. This training is also building up the muscles and stabilizer muscles in my wrists, my forearms, my hands. It's working on proper timing, tightening up my fist just before contact. So for proper speed, you keep your hands loose. You push out and just before contact, you tighten up. It's helping me work on tightening up my hand just last minute, just before the strike hits. There's a whole plethora of good effects from this. There's also a bit about Wolff's Law. Wolff's Law says that bone, whenever put under specific continuous stress, will reform to match that stress. So, what I was talking about earlier, hitting with the wrong knuckles. You may notice in the video that whenever I was hitting with these 2 knuckles on the rope Makiwara, my strikes were lighter. They were about all I could handle pain-wise. However, hitting with these knuckles, I was able to throw more force in with obviously less damage. I've made it my goal to test Wolf's Law on my own hands. Instead of turning my hand into a spear, using these 2 points of contact, bending the wrist to make sure that it hits properly, possibly folding my wrist in, I've been working on turning my entire fist into a club, more or less. There's a lot more contact that's made with the opponent, but there's also a lot less damage taken in to my hand. For a lot of you guys that are going to comment on this and say, well, that's a good way to break your knuckle. I've been punching stuff this way for years. I've never broken anything in my hand, and I've gotten some good force into it. My bones have reformed stronger in order to take that weight-bearing load. So, just a few things to look at with any type of training you do. I'm not recommending you go against what your instructor said or what your doctor says under any means necessary. That's a good way to get injured, and I'm not liable for any injuries that comes from people trying this without doctor's permission. Anyway, there's my disclaimer for the day. So, I want to do something a little bit different with this video. I want you guys to tell me what you do as a martial artist to condition your hands. There is no wrong or right answer, unless you're saying you're punching a balloon, then, I mean, you could probably push yourself a little bit harder. But there is no wrong or right answer, there's just the answer for the individual. And I ask that everybody that comments on this and tells me what they do for their iron body training, or, yeah, let's go past iron palm, iron hand, iron fist, iron body training. What do you do to condition yourself? Comment in the section below, and let's train a little bit of training knowledge. Guys, until next time, have a good week.